Silence didn't just fall over the diner. It crashed down like a heavy weight the moment the black SUV pulled up. When the man in the charcoal suit stepped inside, even the grease frying on the griddle seemed to quiet down. He was a man who owned the city, a man whose name was whispered in fear, not spoken aloud. But while grown men trembled and looked away, a 6-year-old girl with worn-out sneakers slid off her booth seat. She didn't see a monster. She saw a man with big hands. She walked right up to the most dangerous man in the city, tugged on his expensive jacket, and asked a question that would change the fate of everyone in that room. "Mister, are you strong? Can you fix our door? Mummy's scared." What happened next didn't just shock the patrons. It started a war. Rain battered the neon sign of the Midnight Griddle, causing the flickering red letters to buzz angrily against the wet darkness of the Chicago night. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee, bleach, and desperation. It was a Tuesday, typically a slow night, but the humidity made everyone irritable. Sarah Bennett wiped down the counter for the 10th time that hour, her movements mechanical. At 26, she looked older. The dark circles under her eyes were not a fashion statement. They were the bruises of exhaustion left by double shifts and sleepless nights. Her uniform, a pale blue dress that had seen better days, hung loosely on her frame. She checked the clock. 10:15 p.m. 2 more hours until she could clock out, collect her meager tips, and walk the 4 blocks home to the apartment that terrified her. In the corner booth nearest the kitchen, her daughter, Leora, was coloring. Leora was small for 6, with messy pigtails and eyes that held too much wisdom for a child who should only know playgrounds and cartoons. She was quiet, trained by circumstance to be invisible while Mummy worked. The bell above the door chimed. It wasn't the polite tinkle of a customer entering. The door was shoved open with authority. The atmospheric shift in the diner was immediate. 2 men entered first, large, broad-shouldered, wearing suits that cost more than Sarah made in a year. They scanned the room with predatory efficiency. Then, the 3rd man entered. Lorenzo Moretti. Even Sarah, who tried to keep her head down and ignore the local politics of the underworld, knew who he was. Enzo Moretti was not just a mobster. He was the gravity that held the city's darker elements in orbit. He was in his late 50s, with silver hair swept back impeccably, and a face etched with the kind of hard lines that only violence and absolute power can carve. He didn't look angry. He looked bored, which was somehow infinitely more terrifying. "Coffee. Black. 3 cups," one of the bodyguards barked, pointing to the center booth. Sarah swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Yes, sir. Right away." The diner was nearly empty, save for old Mr. Henderson nursing a soup in the back and a couple of truckers near the window. Everyone stopped eating. They stared at their plates, praying to remain unnoticed. Lorenzo sat in the center booth, his back to the wall, eyes scanning the street outside. He placed a heavy hand on the table, a gold ring catching the dim light. He looked like a king holding court in a stable. Sarah's hands shook as she poured the coffee. "Don't spill it. Please, God, don't spill it." She approached the table, feeling the heat radiating from the men. "Here you go," she whispered, sliding the mugs onto the table. Lorenzo didn't look up. He just stared at the rain streaking the window. The bodyguard nodded, dismissing her. Sarah exhaled, a breath she didn't know she was holding, and retreated behind the counter. She looked over at Leora. Her daughter had stopped coloring. Leora was staring at Lorenzo. "Leora, honey, keep coloring," Sarah hissed softly, wiping a glass with frantic energy. "Don't stare." But Leora didn't listen. She was studying Lorenzo with intense curiosity. She saw something the adults were too terrified to see. She saw a grandfather figure. She saw strength. Before Sarah could react, Leora slid off the red vinyl seat. "Leora, no!" Sarah whispered, freezing in place. She couldn't yell. Yelling would draw attention. Leora walked across the checkered floor, her light-up sneakers squeaking softly. The sound was deafening in the silent diner. One of the bodyguards, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, stood up halfway, his hand moving inside his jacket. Lorenzo held up a single finger. The bodyguard sat back down instantly. The Mafia boss turned his head slowly. His cold, grey eyes landed on the small girl standing at the edge of his table. She was holding a purple crayon. "You're lost, little one," Lorenzo said. His voice was like gravel grinding together. Deep, resonant, and devoid of warmth. Sarah felt her heart hammer against her ribs. She rushed out from behind the counter, her apron catching on the latch. "I'm so sorry, sir. She's just a child. She doesn't know." "Quiet," Lorenzo said, not unkindly, but with enough force to seal Sarah's lips. He looked back at Leora. "Well?" Leora wasn't scared. She looked at the bodyguard, then back to Lorenzo. "My mummy says it's rude to stare, but you look like the giant in my storybook." The bodyguard with the scar choked on a laugh, turning it into a cough. Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but the corner of his eye twitched. "Is that so?" Lorenzo asked. "Is the giant a good guy or a bad guy?" "He's strong," Leora stated, bypassing the moral question entirely. She took a step closer. "Are you strong?" "Leora, please come here," Sarah pleaded, tears pricking her eyes. She was terrified. One wrong word, one spilled drink, one annoyed glance, and people like Lorenzo Moretti could make a waitress disappear. Lorenzo ignored Sarah. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. The dynamic in the room shifted. The predator was intrigued by the fawn. "I'm strong enough," Lorenzo said. Leora nodded, satisfied. She reached into the pocket of her worn denim jumper and pulled out a small, rusty hinge. It was broken, the metal twisted. "Can you fix our door?" Leora asked, her voice trembling slightly for the first time. "The lock is broken. The wood is cracked. Mummy pushes the dresser in front of it every night, but she cries because she thinks the bad man is going to push it open." The silence in the diner changed texture. It went from fearful to icy. Lorenzo looked at the rusty hinge in the girl's small, dirt-stained hand. He looked at the purple crayon. Then, slowly, he lifted his gaze to Sarah. Sarah was trembling, her hands covering her mouth. The shame was burning her alive. She didn't want this powerful stranger to know her humiliation, her poverty, her fear. "Who is the bad man?" Lorenzo asked softly. Leora looked down at her shoes. "Mr. Holloway. He yells. He kicks the door. He says if Mummy doesn't pay the extra money, he's going to take our stuff and put it on the street. But the door, the lock doesn't work. Mummy is scared to sleep." Lorenzo picked up the broken hinge from Leora's hand. It was tiny in his palm. He turned it over, examining the cheap metal. "Holloway." Lorenzo repeated the name. He looked at his bodyguard. "Tony. Do we know a Holloway?" Big Tony pulled out a phone, tapping rapidly. "Braden Holloway, low-level slumlord. Owns a few crumbling tenements in the East District. Known for racketeering, illegal evictions, and cutting corners on maintenance. A cockroach boss." Lorenzo nodded. He handed the hinge back to Leora. "I can fix it," Lorenzo said. Sarah rushed forward, grabbing Leora's hand. "Sir, please, you don't have to. She's just playing. We're fine, really. I can call a handyman. I'm so sorry she bothered you." Lorenzo stood up. He towered over Sarah. He wasn't looking at her like a nuisance. He was looking at her with a strange intensity. "You finish your shift at 11, correct?" he asked. Yes. But "We will wait," Lorenzo said, sitting back down. "And then we will go fix this door." The next 45 minutes were the longest of Sarah's life. She moved through the diner in a daze, serving the few customers who dared to remain. Every time she glanced at the center booth, Lorenzo was there, sipping his coffee, reading a newspaper he had produced from nowhere. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't speak to his men. He just waited. Leora, oblivious to the tension, had returned to her booth. She was drawing a new picture now, a picture of a tall man in a suit standing next to a broken door. When the clock struck 11 p.m., Sarah untied her apron with shaking fingers. She went to the back office to count out her tips. $42. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. Braden Halloway, her landlord, had raised the rent by $200 last week, claiming administrative fees. When she argued, he had kicked the door so hard the frame splintered and the deadbolt snapped. Since then, the door wouldn't close properly. Sarah grabbed her coat and walked out to the main floor. "Ready?" Lorenzo asked. He was already standing. "Sir, really, I can't ask you to do this," Sarah stammered. You're a busy man. It's just a broken lock." "It's not just a lock," Lorenzo said, buttoning his suit jacket. "It's a child's sleep. Lead the way." They walked out into the rain. Sarah expected them to get into the massive black SUV, but Lorenzo signaled for the car to follow slowly. He walked beside Sarah and Leora on the cracked sidewalk. The sight was surreal. A single mother in a worn coat, a little girl skipping through puddles, and the Don of the Chicago crime syndicate, flanked by 2 mountains of muscle, walking through the pouring rain. Sarah lived in a building that looked like it was held together by mold and gravity. The brickwork was crumbling, and the front buzzer system had been ripped out years ago. They walked up 3 flights of stairs that smelled of cabbage and stale cigarettes. When they reached apartment 3B, Lorenzo paused. The door was a disaster. The wood around the frame was splintered outward, evidence of violent force. There was no knob, just a hole stuffed with a rag. "This is not a broken lock," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping an octave. "This is a breach." Sarah unlocked the secondary chain, the only thing offering them privacy, and pushed the door open. It scraped loudly against the floorboards. Inside, the apartment was clean but sparse. A mattress on the floor served as a couch. A small table with 2 mismatched chairs sat in the kitchen. But what caught Lorenzo's eye immediately was the heavy oak dresser, pushed halfway across the living room floor. Scuff marks on the linoleum showed the nightly struggle Sarah endured to drag the heavy furniture in front of the door, to barricade them in. "Mummy pushes it every night," Leora said, pointing to the dresser. "Then she sits on top of it with the baseball bat." Lorenzo looked at Sarah. For the first time, his eyes softened, just a fraction. He saw the baseball bat leaning against the wall. He saw the terror etched into the lines of her face. "Tony," Lorenzo said quietly. "Yeah, boss. Get the tools from the trunk and call a contractor, a real one. I want a steel core reinforced door installed here. Tonight." "Tonight, boss? It's near midnight." Did I stutter? Tony scrambled down the stairs. Sarah stood in the middle of her living room, water dripping from her hair. "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why are you doing this? I can't pay you. I don't have anything." Lorenzo walked over to the window. He looked out at the street, where the rain was washing away the grime of the city. "I had a daughter," Lorenzo said, his back to her. "She would have been about your age now." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The grief in his silence was louder than the storm outside. For the next hour, the apartment was a hive of activity. Lorenzo Moretti, wearing a $3,000 suit, took off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and helped his bodyguards tear the rotten frame out of the wall. He didn't watch. He worked. He hammered. He measured. He sweated. Leora sat on the mattress, watching them with wide eyes. She offered Lorenzo a juice box. He accepted it with the solemnity of receiving a royal decree. By 1 a.m., a temporary heavy-duty lock was installed, and the frame was reinforced with steel brackets Tony had sourced from a 24-hour hardware depot. "The contractor will be here at 7:10 a.m. to install the permanent steel door," Lorenzo told Sarah, wiping grease from his hands with a handkerchief. "Do not open it for anyone but him." "Thank you," Sarah whispered. She was exhausted, but for the first time in months, she didn't feel hunted. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't," Lorenzo said. He put his jacket back on, instantly transforming back into the untouchable king of the city. Suddenly, heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. A man's voice, loud and slurred with alcohol, echoed in the hallway. "Bennett, I know you're in there. I saw the lights." Sarah froze. Her face went pale white. She grabbed Leora and pulled her behind her. It was Braden Halloway. The door to the apartment was wide open as Tony was gathering the tools. Halloway stumbled into the doorway, a beer bottle in his hand. He was a greasy man, wearing a cheap leather jacket and smelling of cheap whiskey. "I told you, you little deadbeat," Halloway yelled, not looking at who else was in the room. He was focused entirely on Sarah. "I want the late fee, cash, or I'm throwing your brat's toys out the window right now." Halloway stepped into the room, raising his hand as if to shove Sarah. He never made contact. A hand, large, manicured and strong as iron, caught Halloway's wrist in mid-air. Halloway froze. He looked at the hand, then up the arm, past the silk suit, into the eyes of Lorenzo Moretti. Lorenzo didn't shout. He didn't yell. He smiled, and it was the most terrifying smile Braden Halloway had ever seen. "Mr. Halloway, I presume?" Lorenzo purred. Halloway blinked, his drunken haze clearing instantly as survival instincts kicked in. He recognized the face. Everyone in Chicago knew the face. "Mr. Moretti?" Halloway stammered, his knees buckling. I didn't know. I mean, this is my building. I was just—" "Your building?" Lorenzo asked, twisting Halloway's wrist slightly. Halloway squealed in pain and dropped the beer bottle. It didn't shatter. It bounced on the rug. "You have a very interesting way of conducting customer service," Lorenzo said, releasing the wrist with a shove that sent Halloway stumbling back against the wall. She's late on rent. She owes me." Halloway tried to bluster, though his voice was thin. Lorenzo reached into his inner pocket. He pulled out a thick envelope. He tossed it at Halloway's feet. "There is $10,000 in there," Lorenzo said calmly. Halloway's eyes bulged. He looked at the money, then at Sarah. "Oh. Well then, that covers everything. I'm glad we could—" "Pick it up," Lorenzo commanded. Halloway scrambled to pick up the envelope. "Now," Lorenzo said, stepping closer, looming over the slumlord. "That buys this building. You are selling it. To me." "What?" "No, I can't. This building is worth—" "The building is condemned," Lorenzo lied smoothly, though looking at the mold, it probably wasn't a lie. "And you are currently trespassing in the home of my friends. Furthermore, I seem to recall hearing a threat against a child. Throwing toys out the window, was it?" Tony and the other bodyguard stepped forward, cracking their knuckles. Halloway looked trapped. I was joking. Just a joke." "I don't have a sense of humor," Lorenzo said. "Get out. My lawyers will contact you in the morning for the deed transfer. If you come near this door, if you even look at this mailbox again, we will have a very different conversation. Do you understand?" Halloway nodded frantically. He turned and ran, tripping over his own feet, scrambling down the stairs as if the devil himself was snapping at his heels. Sarah stared at Lorenzo. You bought the building? It's a good investment, Lorenzo shrugged, adjusting his cuffs. Needs work, new doors, better heating. He looked at Leora, who was now asleep on the mattress, clutching her purple crayon. Get some sleep, Sarah, Lorenzo said. The door is fixed. He turned and left, his men following him into the night. Sarah locked the new heavy-duty deadbolt. She listened to the silence. For the first time in a year, she didn't push the dresser in front of the door. But the story wasn't over. Lorenzo Moretti had just declared war on the slum network of the East District, and Braden Holloway was not the type of man to vanish quietly. He had friends, powerful, corrupt friends in the city council who didn't like Mafia dons messing with their real estate scams. The fix was just the beginning. The transformation of the crumbling apartment building on 4th Street didn't happen quietly. In the neighborhood of East Hollow, change was usually synonymous with decay. But over the next 2 weeks, the building became a fortress of activity. Trucks arrived at dawn. Scaffolding rose like a skeleton around the brick facade. Men in coveralls, men who worked too efficiently to be standard city contractors, swarmed the property. They replaced the rotted windows with triple-pane reinforced glass. They tore out the moldy drywall and installed insulation. They fixed the boiler that hadn't worked since the blizzard of '98. Sarah watched it all from her kitchen window, a mug of tea in her hand, feeling like she had woken up in a different universe. Braden Holloway was gone. He hadn't just been evicted. He had been erased from the property records with a speed that made Sarah dizzy. The new landlord was a shell company called L&L Holdings. Sarah suspected the L stood for Lorenzo, but when she looked at her daughter playing with a new set of art supplies that had mysteriously appeared at their doorstep, she wondered if the second L stood for Leora. Lorenzo Moretti became a fixture in their lives, though he maintained a respectful distance. He never came up to the apartment uninvited. Instead, he happened to be at the diner during Sarah's shifts. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the dynamic shifted again. The diner was bustling. Leora was in her usual booth, but she wasn't alone. Lorenzo was sitting across from her, his expensive Italian suit looking out of place against the cracked vinyl. You have to stay inside the lines, Leora instructed seriously, pushing a coloring book towards the most feared crime lord in the city. Lorenzo, a man who had ordered hits on rival gang leaders without blinking, picked up a teal crayon with delicate precision. The lines are a suggestion, Leora. Sometimes you have to color outside them to make the picture complete. Sarah paused while refilling a ketchup bottle 3 tables away. She watched them. It was terrifying, yet heartbreakingly sweet. She had learned more about Lorenzo Moretti in the whispers of her customers over the last week. They called him the architect. They said he built the city's underworld from the ground up. They said he had ice water in his veins. But Sarah didn't see ice. She saw a man haunted by a ghost. Later that evening, as Sarah was wiping down the counter, Lorenzo approached her. He placed a crisp $20 bill in the tip jar, tipping 100% on a cup of coffee, as usual. "The building," Lorenzo said, his voice low. "Is the heating adequate? The nights are getting colder." "It's perfect," Sarah said, meeting his steel-grey eyes. "Too warm, actually. We're not used to it." "Mr. Moretti?" "Why?" Lorenzo sighed. He looked at the door, ensuring his bodyguards were out of earshot. "My daughter's name was Sophia. She was 6 years old when I lost her. A car accident. A drunk driver." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I had all the money in the world, Sarah. I had power. I had men who would die for me. But I couldn't fix a ruptured spleen. I couldn't fix the car." He looked back at Leora, who was waving at him. "I couldn't save my little girl," he whispered. "But I can fix a door. I can fix a heater. It is A selfish act, perhaps, to soothe my own conscience. It's not selfish, Sarah said softly, placing her hand on his forearm without thinking. The contact was electric, not romantic, but human, a connection between two parents who understood fear. You gave us a home, Lorenzo. You gave us safety. Lorenzo looked at her hand, then up to her face. For a moment, the mask of the Mafia Don slipped, and he was just an old, tired man. Safety is an illusion, Sarah. But we do what we can. He left before she could say more. But while Lorenzo was building a sanctuary, Braden Holloway was building a weapon. Across town, in a plush office, smelling of mahogany and expensive scotch, Braden Holloway sat sweating in a leather chair. Across from him sat Councilman Thaddeus Mercer. Mercer was a man of jagged angles and false smiles. He was the unspoken king of the zoning board, a man who made problems disappear for a price. He had been taking kickbacks from Holloway's slum empire for years. He humiliated me, Thaddeus, Holloway spat, pacing the room. He walked in, broke my wrist, threw money at me like I was a beggar, and stole my building. You can't let Moretti get away with this. That building is prime real estate for the new bypass project. We were going to sell it to the city for millions. Mercer swirled his drink, the ice clinking softly. Lorenzo Moretti is not a man you declare war on, Braden. He is a shark. You are a minnow. But I have you, Holloway wheedled. You control the permits. You control the police inspections. You control the health department. Moretti tries to play legitimate businessman? Fine. Let's see how legitimate he is when the city rains hell on him. Mercer considered this. He didn't care about Holloway's pride, but he did care about the East Hollow Bypass project. If Moretti owned that land and refused to sell, Mercer stood to lose a massive commission. We don't attack Moretti directly, Mercer said, a cruel smile touching his lips. That gets people killed. We attack his hobbies. We attack his strays. The waitress? Holloway asked, his eyes gleaming with malice. We squeeze her, Mercer said. We make her life a living hell. We make her a liability. Moretti doesn't like liabilities. He'll drop her. And once she's unprotected, well, accidents happen in old buildings. The attack didn't come with guns or fists. It came with paper. 3 days after Holloway's meeting with the councilman, Sarah arrived at the Midnight Griddle to find the front door locked. A bright orange sticker was plastered across the glass, closed by order of the Department of Health. Sarah's stomach dropped. She pounded on the glass. Louis, let me in. Louis, the owner, came to the door. He looked 10 years older than he had yesterday. He unlocked the door but blocked her path. I can't let you in, Sarah, Louis said, refusing to meet her eyes. What? Why? What happened? Health inspector came this morning, Louis mumbled. Found violations, lots of them. Rats, mold, stuff that wasn't there last night, Sarah. Someone planted it. But why? Sarah started, then stopped. She knew why. The inspector. He made it clear, Louis whispered, tears welling in his eyes. He said as long as I employ associates of known criminals, the inspections will continue. He mentioned you by name, Sarah. He said you're bad for business. Sarah felt like she had been punched. Louis, I have rent to pay. I have Leora. I know, Louis sobbed, handing her an envelope. Here's your last week's pay, plus a little extra. I can't do it, Sarah. They threatened my liquor license. They threatened to burn the place down. You have to go. Sarah walked away from the diner, the envelope clutching in her hand like a lifeline that was rapidly fraying. She felt the heavy gaze of the city on her. It wasn't just Holloway. It was the system. The rich men in high towers who hated that a monster like Moretti had dared to help a nobody like her. She didn't tell Lorenzo. She was too proud, too ashamed. She didn't want to be a burden. She spent the next 3 days hunting for jobs, but every time she applied, things went wrong. At the grocery store, the manager suddenly lost her application after a phone call. At the laundromat, the owner took one look at her ID and told her to leave. She was being blacklisted. By Friday, the despair was a physical weight. She sat on the floor of her beautiful renovated apartment, the steel door locked tight, counting her remaining cash. It wouldn't last the month. "Mommy," Leora asked, coming out of her bedroom, "is Mr. Enzo coming over for dinner?" "No, honey," Sarah choked out. "Mr. Enzo is busy." "But he promised to fix my dollhouse," Leora said, holding up a plastic house with a cracked roof. Just then, a heavy knock echoed through the apartment. It wasn't the police knock. It was the rhythmic, solid knock of authority. Sarah looked through the peephole. It was Tony, Lorenzo's head bodyguard. She opened the door. Tony looked uncomfortable. "Boss wants to see you. Downstairs." Sarah grabbed her coat and told Leora to stay in her room and watch cartoons. She walked down the fresh, clean stairs to the street. The black SUV was idling at the curb. The back window rolled down. "Get in," Lorenzo said. Sarah climbed in. The interior smelled of leather and expensive cologne. Lorenzo looked furious, but not at her. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. "Tell you what?" "That you lost your job, that Louis fired you, that you've been blackballed from every service job in a 10-mile radius." Sarah looked down at her hands. "I didn't want to trouble you. You've done enough. I can handle it." "You cannot handle this," Lorenzo snapped. "This isn't bad luck, Sarah. This is a siege. Councilman Mercer is trying to starve you out to get to me." "Then maybe you should stay away," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Maybe you're the danger." Lorenzo went silent. The truth of her words hung in the air. He looked out the window, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps," he admitted, "but I do not abandon what is mine." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a set of keys. "I own a bakery on 5th Avenue, Sweet Sophia's. It has been closed for years. It was my daughter's favorite place." He pressed the keys into Sarah's hand. "It is fully stocked. It needs a manager. It needs life. You are not an employee. You are a partner, 50-50 split. Lorenzo, I can't bake. I can't run a business. You are a mother who dragged a dresser across a floor every night to protect her child," Lorenzo said fiercely. "You can do anything. And unlike Louis, I do not fear health inspectors. Let them come. I will have tea with them." Sarah held the keys. They were heavy, cold, and promised a future she didn't think she deserved. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me yet," Lorenzo said darkly, "because now that they know I have countered their move, they will stop using paper. They will use stones." He was right. 2 nights later, the escalating war came to their doorstep. It was 2 a.m. The street was quiet. Sarah and Leora were asleep. The new steel door was locked. The new windows were sealed. But Holloway's hired thugs didn't care about locks. They cared about fear. A van screeched to a halt outside. 3 men in ski masks jumped out. One of them held a brick wrapped in a note. Another held a Molotov cocktail, a bottle filled with gasoline, and a burning rag. "Do it!" the driver yelled. The man threw the brick. It smashed against the reinforced glass of the living room window, but Lorenzo's contractors had installed impact-resistant polycarbonate. The brick didn't shatter the glass. It bounced off with a loud thud, leaving a spiderweb crack but not penetrating. The thug panicked. "It didn't break! Throw the fire!" The second man threw the Molotov. It smashed against the brickwork below the window, erupting into a ball of flame that licked up the side of the building. Inside, the fire alarm screamed. Sarah woke up in a panic. "Leora!" She grabbed her daughter from her bed. The room was filling with the orange glow of the fire outside. Though the flames hadn't breached the interior, the smell of gasoline seeped through the vents. They ran to the back exit, the one Lorenzo had insisted on clearing of debris. They burst out into the alleyway, coughing in the smoke. The thugs were already back in the van, speeding away, tires squealing. Neighbors were shouting. Sirens wailed in the distance. Sarah sat on the cold pavement of the alley, holding a sobbing Leora to her chest. She watched the flames scorching the beautiful new facade of their home. 10 minutes later, the black SUV arrived. It didn't park. It stopped in the middle of the street, blocking traffic. Lorenzo got out. He was wearing a sleeping robe over his pajamas, with a trench coat thrown over it. He had clearly rushed from his bed. He saw the scorch marks. He saw the spiderweb crack on the window where Leora slept. And then he saw Sarah and Leora shivering in the alley, surrounded by paramedics. Lorenzo walked over to them. He knelt down on the dirty asphalt. He didn't check the building. He checked Leora. "Did they hurt you?" he asked, his voice shaking with a rage so profound it sounded like the earth cracking. Leora shook her head, her face buried in Sarah's neck. "I was scared, Mr. Enzo. The fire was loud." Lorenzo stood up. He turned to Tony. "Who?" Lorenzo asked. One word. Witnesses say a grey van. Plates were obscured, but one of the neighbors saw a distinct tattoo on the thrower's neck. A scorpion. Lorenzo nodded. "The scorpion. That's casual muscle, hired from the docks. Holloway is getting sloppy." He looked at the blackened wall of the building. "Take them to the hotel," Lorenzo ordered Tony. "The penthouse suite. Make sure there are 4 guards at the door. No one enters. No one leaves." "Where are you going, boss?" Tony asked nervously. Lorenzo walked to the trunk of his car. He opened it. He didn't take out a toolbox this time. He took out something wrapped in black cloth. "I am done fixing doors," Lorenzo said. "Now, I am going to break one." The Golden Anchor was a dive bar by the docks, the kind of place where sunlight went to die. It was 3:30 a.m. The place was smoky, filled with dock workers, petty thieves, and the hired muscle of the city's underbelly. In a booth at the back, 3 men were celebrating. They were high on adrenaline and cheap vodka. The man with the scorpion tattoo on his neck was laughing. "Did you see the flames?" he bragged. "Lit up like a Christmas tree. Holloway said it was an easy grand. Scared the waitress. Send a message to the mob boss." "You think Moretti will retaliate?" the second thug asked nervously. "Moretti?" Scorpion laughed. "He's an old man. He plays with real estate now. He's gone soft. He's probably crying in his mansion." The front door of the bar didn't open. It exploded inward. The bouncer, a 300-pound giant, flew backward as if hit by a truck, landing on a pool table with a sickening crunch. Lorenzo Moretti stepped through the shattered frame. He was not wearing his suit. He was wearing black tactical gear, a remnant of a life he had tried to leave behind. In his hand was a heavy, silver-plated cane with a weighted eagle's head handle. The music stopped. The bar went silent. Lorenzo didn't look at the crowd. He looked directly at the back booth. He walked through the bar, his cane tapping rhythmically on the sticky floor. Tap, tap, tap. The men in the booth scrambled to stand up. Scorpion reached for a knife in his boot. He never reached it. Lorenzo moved with a speed that defied his age. He swung the cane. The heavy silver eagle connected with Scorpion's hand, shattering the bones instantly. Scorpion screamed, falling to his knees. Lorenzo didn't stop. He kicked the second man in the kneecap, sending him sprawling, and backhanded the third man with the cane, knocking him unconscious. He grabbed Scorpion by the throat and slammed him onto the table amidst the spilled vodka and broken glass. "You like fire?" Lorenzo whispered, leaning close. His eyes were void of humanity. They were two black holes. "You like scaring children?" I was just paid," Scorpion wheezed, blood bubbling on his lips. "It was Holloway, and the politician, Mercer. They told us to torch the place." "I know," Lorenzo said. He tightened his grip. "But you took the job. You threw the bottle." Lorenzo pulled a lighter from his pocket. A gold Zippo. He flicked it open. The flame danced in the reflection of Scorpion's terrified eyes. "Please, no!" Scorpion begged. Lorenzo stared at the flame. He thought of Leora shivering in the alley. He thought of the cracked window. "Tell Holloway," Lorenzo said, extinguishing the lighter and leaning down to whisper in the thug's ear, "that I am coming to the city council meeting tomorrow, and tell him to bring a coffin." Lorenzo released the man, who slumped to the floor, sobbing. Lorenzo turned to the stunned patrons of the bar. "This establishment is closed." He walked out into the night, leaving a room full of hardened criminals trembling in his wake. Meanwhile, at the Grand Hotel, Sarah couldn't sleep. The luxury of the penthouse suite felt like a prison. Leora was finally asleep in the massive king-sized bed surrounded by pillows. Sarah stood on the balcony, looking out at the city skyline. She wrapped her arms around herself. The door opened. She turned, expecting a maid or a guard. It was Lorenzo. He had changed back into a suit, but he looked disheveled. There was a smear of blood on his cuff that wasn't his. He looked exhausted, older than she had ever seen him. He walked to the minibar and poured a glass of water. His hand was shaking. "Is it over?" Sarah asked from the balcony doorway. Lorenzo drank the water in one gulp. "The men who threw the fire are dealt with." "Dealt with," Sarah repeated. The reality of who this man was washed over her. She had been ignoring it, blinded by his kindness, but tonight the violence had come too close. "Lorenzo, you hurt them." "I did," he admitted. He didn't look at her. "I am a bad man, Sarah. I have never claimed otherwise." "You almost killed them," she accused, stepping into the room. "I saw the look in your eyes in the alley. You aren't just a businessman. You're a killer." Lorenzo turned to face her. "Yes, I am. And because I am a killer, your daughter is asleep in a warm bed instead of a hospital burn unit. Because I am a killer, the men who did this are currently regretting the day they were born. Do not look at me with judgment, Sarah, when you are standing behind the shield I provide." Sarah flinched. The words were harsh, but they rang with a brutal truth. "I don't want Leora to grow up in a war zone," Sarah said, tears spilling over. "I don't want her to know this life. I want her to be safe, truly safe. Not just Mafia safe." Lorenzo's shoulders sagged. The anger drained out of him, leaving only sadness. "I know," he whispered. "That is why this ends tomorrow." "What happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow is the monthly City Council open forum," Lorenzo said. "Councilman Mercer will be there. The press will be there. Holloway will likely be lurking nearby." "You're going to kill them?" Sarah asked, horrified. "No," Lorenzo smiled, a sad, weary smile. "Killing a politician makes him a martyr. Killing a slumlord makes him a victim. I am going to destroy them completely, and I need your help." "My help? What can I do?" "You have the one thing I do not," Lorenzo said. "You have innocence, and you have the truth." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital voice recorder. "Tony found this on Scorpion," Lorenzo lied smoothly. In reality, his hackers had tapped Mercer's phone weeks ago, but Sarah didn't need to know the extent of his illegal surveillance. "It is a recording of Mercer ordering the arson. It connects him to Holloway. It connects them to the health department fraud. He handed the tiny device to Sarah. If I play this, they will say it is doctored. They will say it is a Mafia plot, Lorenzo said. But if a mother, a victim of arson, a hard-working woman, plays it, the world will listen. Sarah looked at the recorder. It was small, plastic, and weighed almost nothing. Yet it held the power to topple giants. You want me to stand up in front of the whole city, Sarah said. I want you to fix the door, Lorenzo said, echoing Leora's words from weeks ago. Not just for you, but for every family in East Hollow that Mercer and Holloway have crushed. I will be right beside you. I promise. Sarah looked at Leora sleeping. She thought of the fear she felt every time Holloway banged on the door. She thought of the closed sign on the diner. She closed her hand around the recorder. Her eyes hardened. Okay, Sarah said. Let's burn them down. City Hall was a monument to bureaucracy, a towering structure of white marble and granite that was designed to make the average citizen feel small. On the morning of the City Council Open Forum, the steps were crowded with reporters. Word had leaked, courtesy of an anonymous tip from a burner phone, that the East Hollow arson was going to be addressed. Inside the council chamber, the air was stale and recycled. Councilman Thaddeus Mercer sat at the center of the raised dais, looking down at the gathered constituents like a disappointed schoolmaster. He wore a navy suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. In the front row, Braden Holloway sat with his arms crossed, looking smug. He had already bribed the fire marshal to rule the arson as accidental wiring, and he expected today to be a victory lap for his new zoning permits. At 10 a.m., the heavy oak doors at the back of the chamber swung open. The room quieted. It wasn't just the arrival of two people. It was the arrival of a force of nature. Sarah Bennett walked in first. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked pale, but her chin was high. She wasn't holding a tray of drinks. She was holding a thick leather binder. Behind her, a step to the right, walked Lorenzo Moretti. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal three-piece suit, his silver hair catching the harsh fluorescent lights. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a senator, or perhaps an emperor. He walked with a cane, the silver-headed eagle cane, but he didn't lean on it. He carried it like a scepter. The murmuring began instantly. Is that Moretti? What is he doing here? Who is the woman? Mercer banged his gavel, the sound cracking through the room like a gunshot. Order! Order in the chamber! Mercer bellowed, his face flushing slightly. This is a closed session for zoning discussions. If you are not on the docket, we are on the docket, Lorenzo's voice cut through the air. He didn't shout, but his baritone carried to the furthest corner of the balcony. Citizen comment period. 10:15 a.m., Sarah Bennett. Mercer looked at his clerk, who nervously shuffled papers. I don't see. Check again, Lorenzo suggested, his eyes locking onto the clerk. The clerk swallowed hard, found a piece of paper that had mysteriously appeared in the file, and nodded frantically. Ms. Bennett has the floor for 5 minutes, the clerk squeaked. Mercer scowled, gripping his gavel until his knuckles turned white. Fine. 5 minutes. Make it quick. Sarah walked to the podium. The microphone looked like a snake ready to strike. She looked at the crowd. She saw the reporters. She saw Holloway sneering at her from the front row. She felt a wave of nausea. Her knees shook. I can't do this. I'm just a waitress. She looked back. Lorenzo was standing by the wall, arms crossed, watching her. He gave her a nearly imperceptible nod. Fix the door, his eyes seemed to say. Sarah took a deep breath. She gripped the sides of the podium. My name is Sarah Bennett, she began, her voice wavering before finding its steel. I am a mother. I am a resident of East Hollow, and 2 nights ago, someone tried to burn my daughter alive in her bed. A gasp rippled through the room. "Objection!" Holloway shouted, standing up. "This is slander. That fire was an accident. Old wiring." "Sit down, Mr. Holloway," Mercer commanded, trying to maintain control. "Let her speak." "It wasn't wiring," Sarah continued, her voice gaining volume. "It was a Molotov cocktail thrown by a man named Arthur Scorpion Miller, a man hired by Braden Holloway." "Lies!" Holloway screamed, turning purple. "You have no proof. She's crazy. She works for gangsters." Sarah opened the leather binder. She didn't look at Holloway. She looked directly at Mercer. "I have the police report from last night, where Mr. Miller confessed to the arson," Sarah said, holding up a document. "I have the hospital records of my daughter's treatment for smoke inhalation." She paused for effect. The room was deadly silent. "And," Sarah said, pulling out the small digital recorder, "I have this." She pressed play and held the device up to the microphone. The audio was grainy, but the voices were unmistakable. Voice 1, Mercer. "I don't care how you do it, Braden. Just get her out. Moretti is making a play for the land. I need that block cleared for the bypass commission." Voice 2, Holloway. "She's stubborn, and Moretti put in a steel door." Voice 1, Mercer. "Then burn the door down. Scare them. If the building takes some damage, so what? It's condemned anyway. Just make sure it happens before the council vote on Wednesday." The recording clicked off. The silence in the council chamber was absolute. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hanging at the top of its arc. Mercer was frozen. His face had drained of all color. He looked like a wax figure, melting under heat. Holloway looked around wildly, like a trapped rat. That is doctored," Mercer stammered, his voice an octave higher than usual. "This is AI. This is a fabrication by organized crime." "Is it?" Lorenzo spoke up from the back. He walked forward slowly, the tap of his cane echoing. "Because my associates also took the liberty of examining the public ledger, it seems Mr. Holloway's shell corporation, BH Rentals, wired $50,000 to an offshore account in the Caymans last Tuesday. An account listed under the name Mercer Consulting Group." Lorenzo pulled a stack of bank statements from his inner pocket and tossed them onto the press table. The reporters descended on the papers like sharks on chum. Flashbulbs erupted, blinding and chaotic. "This meeting is adjourned," Mercer screamed, banging his gavel so hard the handle snapped. "Security, clear the room." But the security guards didn't move. They were looking at the bank statements. They were looking at Sarah, the mother who had stood up to the giants. Holloway tried to bolt. He jumped over the barrier and ran toward the side exit. "Tony," Lorenzo said calmly. Tony, who had been standing by the exit, simply stepped into the doorway. Holloway ran full speed into Tony's chest and bounced off, falling onto the carpet. "Going somewhere?" Tony asked. Sirens wailed outside. Not fire trucks this time, but police cruisers. State police. Lorenzo hadn't just relied on the corrupt city cops. He had sent the evidence to the state attorney general 3 hours ago. The doors burst open. Uniformed officers swarmed the room. "Thaddeus Mercer, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit arson, racketeering, and fraud," a captain announced, marching up the dais. Mercer was dragged away in handcuffs, screaming about his rights. Holloway was hauled up from the floor, weeping. Sarah stood at the podium watching them go. She felt lightheaded. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her trembling. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Lorenzo. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it," Sarah corrected, tears streaming down her face. Lorenzo shook his head. "I just held the door open. You walked through it." As the cameras turned towards them, Lorenzo stepped back, fading into the shadows of the room. He let Sarah stand in the light. He let the mother be the hero. 6 months later, The scent of cinnamon and fresh yeast filled Fifth Avenue. The sign above the door read, "Sweet Sophia's," in elegant gold script, and the bakery was alive with customers. Sarah Bennett moved behind the counter, not as a terrified waitress, but as a confident owner. In the window seat, Leora sat with her homework, occasionally supervising the staff with a miniature apron and grave seriousness. The bell chimed. Lorenzo Moretti entered. The sharp, predatory lines of his face seemed softened, less burdened by the weight of his empire. He ordered his usual espresso and sat opposite Leora. "Hello, giant," Leora chirped, not looking up from her math book. "Hello, princess," Lorenzo replied, a genuine smile touching his lips. "How are the fractions?" "Terrible," she sighed. "Just eat the whole pie, I say." Lorenzo chuckled, a warm sound that rumbled in his chest. When the morning rush subsided, Sarah approached their table with a thick envelope. She slid it across the polished wood. "This month's profits," she said proudly. "Your 50%. Lorenzo didn't touch it. He pushed it gently back toward her. "Put it in a college fund for Leora." Lorenzo, no. The deal was 50-50. You put up the capital, you own the building. Lorenzo stood, adjusting his charcoal suit. He looked around the bakery, named after his lost daughter, and saw the life inside it. He saw the family he had helped rebuild. "I have enough money, Sarah," Lorenzo said quietly. "What I lacked was this." He gestured to the warmth of the room. "I transferred the deed to the building into your name this morning. The bakery, the apartment upstairs. It is all yours. No partners. No debts." Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Lorenzo, that's a fortune. I can't accept that." "You aren't accepting a gift," he said, his eyes intense. "You're accepting a payment. You saved me, Sarah. You and that little girl reminded me that I am not just a monster. You reminded me that even broken doors can be fixed." He reached out and gently touched the top of Leora's head. "I will be traveling for a while. It is time for the old guard to step back." "Will we see you again?" Leora asked, eyes wide. "Always," Lorenzo promised. "I will be watching. If anyone ever tries to break your door again, they will answer to me." He walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight. The black SUV was waiting, and within moments, he disappeared into the city traffic. Sarah watched him go, tears pricking her eyes. Then she turned back to her bakery, to her daughter, and to her life. She walked to the front door and flipped the sign to closed for a brief break. She turned the lock, solid brass, polished and unbreakable. It clicked with a heavy, satisfying sound. She was safe. She was strong. And she knew, deep down, that she always would be. And that is the story of how a single question from an innocent child brought down a criminal empire. It's easy to judge people by their appearances, to see a waitress and think victim, or to see a mob boss and think monster. But as Sarah and Lorenzo showed us, true strength isn't about how much fear you can cause, but how much fear you can take away. Lorenzo Moretti spent his life breaking things, but in the end, his legacy was defined by what he fixed. It reminds us that no matter how dark the world gets, kindness, even from the most unlikely places, can still light a fire that burns down injustice. If you enjoyed this story of redemption, justice, and the power of a mother's love, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that even the broken doors in our lives can be fixed. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.